o ngā mihi ki a koutou katoa, whakarunga aki au ki te tangi a te manu, e re re runga rawa e. Tui, 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 tui a, tui a I runga, tui a I raro, tui a I roto, tui a I waho, tui, tui, tui a. Kia rongo te ao, kia rongo te pō, tui, tui, tui a. Tēnā tātou katoa, ngā mihi, kia koutou katoa e huihui mai nei ki tēnei wānanga. Ko Moana Emett, toko ingoa, no tauranga moana hau, ko pātaua toko kainga, ko Ngāti Ranginui me Ngāti Pukenga, oku iwi, ti hei mauri ora. Welcome to our presentation today on PB4L Restorative Practice in Aotearoa, New Zealand schools. We're going to be presenting today about a 5-year project that we have been involved in as a team, implementing restorative practice in over 330 schools across New Zealand. My name is Moana Emett and I am the professional leader for this project, and I work for the Institute of Professional Learning Te Whaitua Tangata, which is in the School of Education, University of Waikato, and is so grateful to be here today. We hold a contract with the Ministry of Education here in New Zealand, and as a team we have been working with many schools. My whānau is from Tauranga Moana, which is in the Bay of Plenty, which is the east coast of New Zealand, and I live in a very small and beautiful place further north, and the name of that place is Pātaua. I will be facilitating today with two of my very esteemed colleagues, Leanne Carlson and Wendy Drew, who will now introduce themselves. So I'll hand over to you first, Leanne. And Leanne, could you start us off with a karakia?
Ai, me noi tātou. Pauhihiri, paurarama, pau o te whakaro, pau o te aroha, te pau e here nei I a tātou, mauri ora I a tātou, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Okay, kia ora tātou, ko Leanne Carlson toko ingoa, no Tuakau hau. My name's Leanne Carlson. I originally am from Tuakau, which is south of this big city I live in now, which is Tamaki Makaurau. I live in Auckland. And you see in the top right, there's a photo of parts of Auckland from one of the 50 volcanoes that sit Auckland is amongst. In the second picture is my two adult children. I married a Cook Islander and they live in the Cook Islands, which is COVID-free and has been through this whole year. And I'm looking forward to hopefully to seeing them soon. I have 36 years experience in education in the primary sector as teacher, DP and principal. So I bring all those years of experience working with stakeholders in that area. I was principal overseas in Kuwait and Abu Dhabi. And the number 70 by my name is not my age. It's the number of countries I have visited so far. And it's on hold, of course, for now, but hope to get out and visit some more soon. Now I'd like to introduce Wendy Drury to you.
Kia ora tātou. Tēnā koutou katoa. No whaingaroa aho. I'm from Raglan, which is this beautiful picture here. This is where I live. But I came to this country from England quite a long time ago, in 1949. And so my iwi is Ngāti Inarangi. I belong to the English tribe. And my name is Wendy Drury. My whānau is Drury and my ingoa is Wendy. And I grew up with very few rallies in New Zealand, but now I seem to have helped to produce quite a large family, some of whom are here on the page with me. Kia ora tātou. I must say, I should say that I have worked at the University of Waikato for over 30 years, and that I taught about and worked with restorative practice since the early 2000s, and with colleagues in the counselling program initially, and was part of the group that bid for and got the contract, which we will now start describe for you.
Kia ora, Wendy. Well, we'd like to start with this lovely whakatauki. Mana kitea te tangata, aha ko wai, aha ko no here. Treat people respectfully, irrespective of who they are and where they come from. And this underpins the mahi, the work that we're doing here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So how are we working with schools to grow the capability and capacity and support school communities to embed relational and restorative practice in practical ways? And that is what this presentation is about. We'd really like to share with you the way that we as a team have gone about over the last 5 years implementing restorative practice in over 330 schools and still continuing to do so with a new cohort coming on very soon. So Wendy, can you tell us more about the beginnings of restorative practice here in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Thank you, Moana. Yes, this project that we are currently reporting on began as a law project in restorative justice, where a youth court judge in New Zealand was quite concerned at the number of young people coming before the youth court. And he noticed that most of them were dropouts from school, and he surmised that the answer was to keep kids in school. And there were too many suspensions from schools. So the Ministry of Education in New Zealand joined with the Ministry of Justice to offer a contract to develop a process based on formal conferencing, where we trialled conferencing in schools to try and reduce the numbers of suspensions that were happening out of schools. And our very strong finding in that trial was that formal conferencing in the way that we had conceptualised it was not the answer. What happened in the trial was that pretty much every conference that we went to, where we went around and asked what had happened, people who were listening said, why did we not know about this before? And so we realised that a lot of the suspensions were happening too late or at the end of what had been a long period of coming to notice. It took quite a long time and a lot of discussion in New Zealand, but eventually the University of Waikato, of which I was a member of their team, won the first Ministry of Education contract to develop and deliver restorative practice to schools across our country.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for that.
I can't change it. So as a result of that first contract, we had developed quite a lot of resources, and we brought that together in a small booklet, which is currently still available, and I'm assured by many people around the world that it is actually still quite useful, describing the process that we developed and something about our understanding of how inclusive and respectful language works. So it's available at this link for free download.
And we'll make sure that the link is available for you on our landing page here for our presentation as well, so that you can access it after our presentation.
Thank you.
And this is our beautiful team. And we are actually in one of our University of Waikato buildings in Tauranga Moana, which is the area that my whānau are from. And so here you can see our wider team that works across the different regions in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So Leanne, why has the New Zealand Ministry of Education invested in restorative practice in over 300 schools?
Kia ora, Moana. Okay, Wendy explained the origins of restorative practice or restorative justice into restorative practice, but the New Zealand curriculum has 5 key competencies which underpin everything we do. And aspirationally, we want all of our young people to leave school and move into their life, in the working life, with these skills of managing themselves, relating well to others, participating and contributing in society, being able to think about things and problem solve, and to use their language, symbols and texts very well. So that's the core that underpins our curriculum. And so restorative practice can grow those skills. Restorative practice really is all about relationships. And in schools, we work very hard, the teachers work very hard to build good, positive relationships with their students, because research shows that quality relationships create quality learning. So it's not just about building the relationships, but also maintaining them and restoring them when things go wrong and sustaining them over time. The principles that the Ministry of Education have for restorative practice, firstly, it's all about relationships, as we mentioned before, that they have a major influence on behaviour and therefore learning as well. That a culture of care supports the mana of all individuals in the school community. Now, mana is a concept from Te Ao Māori, from the Māori world, that it's difficult to translate directly into English because it's a huge concept, but it's about the dignity and the mana, the dignity and the respect of the individual. And it's a very difficult word. It's a very powerful concept that we believe all of us here have. Cultural responsiveness is a key. We work really hard in New Zealand schools to be inclusive of the very many cultures we have in our society, and we do that in a respectful way. Also, using the restorative approach helps individuals learn to take responsibility for their behaviour. And often for our young ones, it's embarrassing to take responsibility when you do dumb stuff. And so we're encouraging them to actually step up and say, yes, it was me, and how I'm going to fix it. So taking responsibility is a big part of that. The framework that we go in, I'm a regional facilitator, so I have responsibility for schools across several regions. What I do first, I meet the team, I get information through a scoping discussion, find out the key information about the school. Then all the stakeholders will do a baseline survey, so we get a read of where their restorative practice knowledge is at the time the project begins. Then the trainers go in and we do essential training, which is for everyone. We try to include as many people as we can, including the caretaker, board of trustees, teaching assistants, anyone that has any contact with people in the school. After the training, the people in my role will co-construct a plan with the school's needs in mind, based on the survey data, based on the essentials training, and a plan to move forward, because embedding restorative practice takes time. One essentials training for a whole day does not make a school restorative. So it's really important that over time, we have a little and often professional development process where we're drip feeding, the staff are drip feeding the skills and strategies to be a fully restorative school over time. And we expect this journey to take 1, 2, 3 years. You know, we will support them through that time. We also have kete books, which we'll look at a little later, that the ministry provide to the schools, which have lots of resources and strategies in them. We have ongoing regional support workshops, restorative circle, mini conferencing for when issues get a little bigger, and formal conferencing for the really high-end serious incidents that happen. Our job as facilitators is we coach and support the schools. We're available if they contact us or we contact them. It's reciprocal and it's built on our relationships with them. We also hold cluster meetings for groups of schools to come together, and they network and they can discuss and share things, issues and challenges they're having at the time, and come up with some solutions. And it's about collaboration together. We do supplementary training for board of trustees. We moved into student leadership training with restorative skills, and whānau training, whānau engagement, which is the families. We also have a key indicator rubric, which helps to track the journey over time, because it takes time to embed that practice. And then we do a survey after 1 year, which gives us another snapshot against the original baseline survey of how the progress is going. And it will show us where the strengths are and where the gaps are, so we can, you know, support the school in that journey. This is a model from the Ministry of Education. You can see the big purplish circle, that's the restorative essentials. That's the training that everybody in the school is involved in. Smaller than that is the circles training, which, as you can see down here, the orange little orange eggs that go down the side, community building circles, dialogue circles, learning, decision making, integration, and conflict circles. We offer those as regional trainings to support the journey and provide more skills. In the green egg-shaped, there is restorative conferences, and you can see over on the green ones, that involves the mini conferences I mentioned before, the classroom conferences, and then the formal ones, which are for the really high-end serious incidents that a really formal process is required to be followed. This is a sample of the rubric. There's many more qualifiers on here, but this is just a couple. On the left, restorative approach, relational approaches and restorative practices are linked with a positive learning culture. And you move it along, the first box is, well, staff only think it's about behaviour, fixing behaviour. And moving along through the box to the middle, some teachers make links between restorative practice and learning culture. Right to the end, most teachers make explicit links about student engagement, restorative practice and learning culture. The next one down is staff using relational approaches and restorative practice. And at the beginning, you know, not many staff have the confidence or the understanding to use those skills. But as we progress months and years down the track, we eventually are hoping that all staff show a high level of competency using relational approaches and restorative practice. It's what we do here.
And here are our support resources. So we use 4 books, 4 kite. And within these books are lots and lots of resources to support teachers, kaiako, with their development of their professional learning, but also with building those relational and restorative conversations with students and with staff, with whānau, families, and with the community. And you can find this link. We'll also add that for you to be able to access after this presentation. We use Kitty Books 1, 2 and 3 with schools. They're able to access that through the Ministry of Education. Book 4 though, you actually have to attend one of our conferencing workshops. It's, you know, conferencing at that higher level is complex. It requires training. So it's important that people have that training first and use the resources alongside that training. So moving from punitive, a punitive culture to a restorative culture requires a big shift in thinking. When you think that about, you know, we've had a punitive society or punitive culture for a long, long time, hundreds of years, maybe even, we could even say thousands of years. So it's going to take a while to shift our mindset from working punitively, and possibly where our experiences also growing up in our workplaces, in our schools have been punitive, to actually working in that restorative space. So moving away from where the focus has been on punishment, you know, you're on detention, you've broken the rules, who's to blame, well, you're to blame, what is the punishment going to be, to actually a more restorative response where the focus is actually on accountability, healing, and also moving, you know, making sure that we unpack, looking at what's happened, who has been affected, how they've been affected, what needs to happen to put things right, and what do we need to do to move forward from here. One of the tools that we use is looking through the social discipline window, and this has been adapted from Wachtell and McCold. And when we look at this, we're looking at the way that discipline has been used, not just in the past, but also today. So when we have a high level of structures, limits, and expectations, and low support, care, and concern, we'll often find ourselves in this two space, in the space where we're working punitively. Many of us may have gone through an education system where it was quite punitive, where there's a lot of confrontation, it's win-lose, it's quite authoritarian, could be stigmatizing. And when we have a high level of support, care, and concern with low structures, limits, and expectations, we might find ourselves in that force space, in that permissive space where we're quite protective but rescuing. We could be undemanding and quite excusing of behaviour. If we have no or little support, care, and concern, and very little limitation, expectations, or structures in place, we might find ourselves in this not space where it's quite neglectful, could be quite indifferent, unsafe, lazy, where, you know, the teacher may have given up, the students may have given up. And the space that we're targeting to work with young people and with each other is in this with space. That's where we've got, you know, a high level of structure, limit, and expectations, but also a high level of support, care, and concern. What we find is when we're working with staff in schools, we lay this lens over the ways that we're working, and we ask staff to, first of all, look in and look at where they might be functioning or working from. I remember in my own training, you know, I aspired to work in this with space. And then when I started teaching, I definitely aspired to be working in that with space, co-constructing, collaborating, teaching and learning with young people. But more often than not, I found myself slipping out into that two space or that four space. Sometimes the not space, but more the two and the four. They tended to be the places that I went to default. And to talk more about that, Leanne is going to share with us around what happens when we don't do that in just a moment. Ted Wachtell talks about the fundamental hypothesis of restorative practices being disarmingly simple. Human beings are happier, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behaviour with those in positions of authority, when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And I know that's been my experience too. What about you?
Yes, Moana, I agree. I kind of default to the answering things for the students and helping them. Spent 36 years as a teacher doing that. And the key to restorative is in the with space, which is asking. And that is my big learning. I was in a classroom yesterday, and there was something had happened, an incident had happened, and you know, instead of going to my default of telling the boys how to fix things, you know, you need to do this and you need to do that, and giving them all the answers, doing the work for them, I was able to be aware now and stop myself and ask them questions. So we get unpack, as Moana said, what happened and who was affected, how were they affected, and how are you going to fix this? And then checking up afterwards that everything was all right. So that the key to restorative is asking questions. And that is difficult for us teachers, as Moana said, and for me, to undo those habits, because teachers, you know, we're quite good at fixing things, and we're quite good also at telling people what to do. So it's resisting those inclinations and moving into the asking space where we're actually empowering our young people. And I know the restorative justice space, that's what we want. We want to empower those people to come up with solutions for themselves and to be able to reflect on what's happened, to think about it, and to move forward from there. Mm. What are some of the behaviours that you see in schools?
Some of the behaviours that we've seen in the schools that we've been working with are these ones here. And then we call them minor behaviours. These are just everyday things that are going on. They're the little things. And of course, in the restorative justice space, that tends to be big stuff. We're working with schools, we're working with children, we're working with all sorts of behaviour, and of course, young people don't come to school and think that they're going to misbehave. They come to school and they behave. And these are some of the things that we see. And I wonder, you know, when you look at this list, how many of these could you put your hand up for? I remember when I went to school, I loved wearing incorrect uniform if I could get away with it. And back then, you know, wearing nail polish on your fingers, or you know, just wearing the sports shoes instead of your actual formal school shoes was a big thing. But today, those are minor things. And so we would be looking at having a mini chat or a relational conversation. If these things are happening in the school, we would suggest that we need to look at our school culture and our values and expectations and the explicit teaching and learning of that, the co-constructing of that with students so that they're part of the conversation, so that when these things come up, we can actually have a warm relational conversation and work through that and keep it really small and move on with learning or whatever else is going on in the classroom or outside of the classroom. These behaviours here, though, these are our top 10 minor behaviours that affect learning. And interestingly, when we see these behaviours, we need to be having a learning conversation. Often these are the behaviours that we might see in the classroom or in more formative learning settings. So for example, if a student is not listening, first of all, listening is a very complex skill. How are they learning about listening? Do they know what to listen for? What do we know about teaching them about listening? How are we scaffolding them with learning to listen? And also, what do we know about them in terms of their auditory processing, their development? Do they have an issue with that? Is there something else going on? So we want to make sure we're having more in-depth, asking more in-depth questions, but also investigating further if things aren't changing. There's something missing here. So we need to explore with that young person to be able to shift what actually is showing up as behaviour of not listening. Another example might be defiant behaviour or disengaging from learning. Is the learning too hard? Is it too easy? What do we know about them as a learner? What part are they playing in leading their learning and navigating their learning? Are we empowering them as learners? What have we done to specifically scaffold them or deliberately scaffold them with their learning so that, once again, they're leading the learning? So if we're saying these types of behaviours, are we having a learning conversation with the young person? When we talk about conversations, there are 3 phases that we want to make sure that we have included in our conversation. First of all, is there some preparation here? Have we taken the time to ensure that we are prepared? Are we ready? Are they ready to have a conversation? Is there information that we need to be sharing as part of this conversation? And then there's the participation itself, making sure that everybody has a voice, everybody has the opportunity to talk about what's actually happening and to explore how that's affecting them, how that's affecting others. And then moving through to the follow-up. What are we going to do beyond here? What needs to change here? Sometimes this is the part that falls down. We do the other 2 parts really well, but we don't do really good follow-up. What do we say that we were going to do? What are going to be the outcomes from here so that we can all move forward together? Now, I've been involved in a number of restorative conversations, some that were only seconds, you know, they were just a really small mini chat, through to, I think my biggest conference was involved 24 people. So there was a lot of preparation. The participation itself only took, I think, about an hour. And then there was definitely follow-up afterwards to ensure that the things that we talked about in the conference actually did occur, and that all parties involved were also included beyond the actual conference day, and the things that we said that we were going to do, that those things were actually done. So what are the keys to success, Leanne?
All right, as Moana said before, the preparation part, are we all calm and ready to talk? Now that includes the adult and the student. One or the other might not be, so just ensure that you know, take time to make sure everyone is ready, and use curious tone of voice. You can still use restorative words, but you can have it like, well, tell me what happened. And it's not very warm and curious. So, you know, I'm interested. Tell me what happened there. And that just, you know, calms everyone down. Also, is it respectfully away from the audience? Otherwise, you've got your adult, you've got your student, and you've got all the bystanders who will be watching and going, well, who's going to win this one? Sir, no, he's going to win. And going to back down. The student can't afford to back down and lose their mana, and the teacher can't afford to back down and lose their mana. So remove situation away from the audience so it's respectful for all parties. And the one thing in schools that we don't do in the restorative process is we don't ask why. And, you know, honestly, in my 36 years in schools, I used to ask why. Why did you do that? You know, and I was curious why they did it. But very often the student has no idea why they did it. They just did it. Or why can also invite them to have lots of excuses and defense. Oh, because this, that, you know, and go there. So we don't go down there, but we find with the questions we use, the why often falls out of the questions because they're carefully crafted open questions that open up that space into what has happened. And these are the 5 steps we follow. First, we ask them to tell the story, you know, tell me what happened there. Even if we saw it, even if we were there and we saw it, we're going to still ask them to tell us what happened. And the reason for that is, one of the key principles we mentioned earlier, we want the young person to learn to take responsibility for their actions. So for their own, step into the space and own what they did. And that's quite difficult for us to do. So that takes time, and hopefully sowing these seeds when they're young, as they grow up, they're more likely to take responsibility for their actions. We then explore the harm by asking, well, who was affected by that and how were they affected? And that taps into growing the empathy part, which is sometimes it's particularly for younger children, it's difficult for them to think how someone else is feeling. But the brain is neuroplastic, so those synapses can be grown, and research shows that empathy can be grown even if it's not in existence to begin with. So repeating those conversations over time, students can learn to think about other people and how the choice of my actions have affected someone else in a certain way. If they can't do it, the adult will coach them through that and support them in that situation. Then we ask them, how can you repair the harm? How can you fix this, do you think? What could you do to make this okay? And then when they come up with a solution, sometimes on their own or sometimes with some support from the adult, we also check in with the person who was harmed to see if that would suit them, because sometimes it's not what they need. So we check in, this person wants to ABC, would that be okay with you? And they can say, yes, yep, that's good. Or they can say, no, it's not okay. And then we go back. Then we reach an agreement between the two. That's an agreement of what's going to be done. And as Moana said, the follow-up is really essential, because teachers are very, very busy people, and they're often juggling many, many plates in the air at the same time. And they do the first part well, as Moana said. They do the preparation, the participation, and they say, okay, I'll catch up with you tomorrow about that. And if that tomorrow doesn't happen because other things have taken over, the students can learn, oh, just say the words, no one will check. So we really encourage teachers to follow up very, very carefully, and to follow up not only with the person who caused the harm, that they have done what they agreed, but also to follow up with the person who was harmed and say, so are you okay now? You feel safe and ready to go on? And making sure that they're okay. And that's the mana enhancing part of the restorative practice. The mana of the person who caused the harm is held, and the mana of the person who the harm was done to is held in the follow-up. And so 4 essential ingredients that we found have work within schools go back to the social discipline window, back to the with response. Was it problem solved collaboratively? Who did most of the talking? And that challenges us teachers because we like to talk. So are the young ones, are they passengers or participants in the conversation? Are we doing the talking and they're just having to agree with us? Or are we asking open questions that they can come up with some solutions so they talk? Was it done respectfully away from the audience? Did they take responsibility? And was everyone's mana kept intact through the whole process? Both parties, the person who caused the harm and the person who was harmed. Is everyone leaving the situation with their shoulders high and feeling at peace? Moana, can you tell us about the warm conversation?
Yeah. So having a warm conversation is another way of ensuring that you are having that relational restorative conversation. And we've used the acronym WARM to remind you, if you've forgotten the process. Well, warm, at least I can be warm in my tone, warm in my manner, but warm what has happened, and who's been affected, what do we need to do to repair this, and then how do we move forward with this together? And I know that when I have a warm conversation, it certainly opens up for the other people involved. It invites them to also have a warm conversation back. So it's amazing how that tone and manner, and by asking those questions, can really make a difference. And Wendy, what else can you share with us about that?
Well, I wanted to ask you a question really to clarify. When are the teachers actually doing this? Do they do it on the hoof, or when do they do it?
Thank you. That's a great question. Leanne?
The idea is to deal with the small little situations. We aim to keep the small things small. So as Moana said, restorative conversations can take 2 or 3 minutes in the moment. However, if there's other things happening at stake, if they need to move away from the audience and that's not possible, then have a firm but fair and a calm voice and just say, look, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this in 10 minutes, or we'll talk about this in the break. And so you give the students some boundaries that this will be discussed in a timely manner. So it depends on the incident and the classroom and the number of people you've got, if you're on duty outside or if you're in learning. So teachers learn to be agile and flexible with that. But the main thing is the students know that we will have a conversation about this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. And we also want to make sure that we are having those warm conversations even in our most formal conferences, where there is often a lot of hurt, a lot of confusion, a number of people may have been affected. When we are warm, and in Aotearoa, New Zealand, when we talk about manaakitanga, we talk about caring for people. We can still have a formal conference, but it can be in a caring way. It can be in a warm way. So what are people in our schools saying about RP, Leanne?
Well, one lot of staff who had been on the project just for one term, who had really picked it up and run with it, I saw them at the end of the term and they said, wow, we're all so much calmer than we were last year. We don't have the emotions, we were just fighting fires everywhere and this, and we're getting stressed and hit up, and they said it reduces our stress and we're so much calmer because we just have a process that we follow. And the process that they follow is this card that the ministry provides for schools on the project. And it's got the tell the story, explore the harm, repair the harm, reach an agreement, and on the back is the follow-up. So it folds up and staff can carry this with them. If they don't have this with them, they can use the warm approach just to follow that process. And students have said, after being exposed to this process, that they don't feel like the teachers are ranting at them. And we get a chance to have our say. Because sometimes, you know, I know as an educator, we can all get our rant on sometimes. And there's no rant. It's just a series of carefully crafted open questions to open up the conversation. Teaching assistant, teacher aide, we call them here, has a lot of students with high needs. And she said her students, the high needs, love this process because they feel safe and they trust it. And they know, like for example, one young fellow came up at lunchtime and said, Miss, I need the blue card. I've got a problem. I need to help you solve it. And he knew that this would help him solve his problem. A DP has also said that the students are learning empathy. They're learning to think about their others and how their actions have an impact on other people. And a principal quite proudly said, wow, they're starting to take responsibility. Now that doesn't happen overnight. It takes the relational trust with the adult. But if they know that they're in safe hands, they're not going to be ranted at or yelled at. It's going to be a simple process to follow. They're more likely to step into that space and take responsibility for what's happened and then come up with ways of how they're going to fix it.
Mm. And when they're taking responsibility, they're now working in the with space. They're not waiting for you to do it to them or make them wrong for it, or they're not waiting for you to do it for them or not do anything at all. Very empowering, much more empowering than obviously doing it for them. And Wendy?
Yes, so this actually really affects the tone of a classroom and also of a school, doesn't it? And I think it affects teachers' lives as well. So I certainly did it when I first understood this. I did it in my own home because I heard myself getting mad at my children and I thought, oh dear, and I changed it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So not only are these skills available and strategies available for us as teachers in the classrooms, but we can go home and use them as well, and they work just as effectively. And one of our students, Manaya, who's 13 years of age, she says, I feel really comfortable talking to the teachers because they actually, will listen to her and allow her to also have her side of the story, which I think is, it's really, really empowering. And she felt really respected and like she was actually being treated like an adult, not like a kid being done to, but actually as a young person working with and alongside, where she can learn and grow and bring her own thoughts and ideas and grow and shift from that as well. So this is one of our last slides, and Wendy, we thought that we would get you to talk about, working, how have we moved from, pre-restorative practice, back in the 70s and 80s, and how this, projects first came about to the ways that we're actually working with students today in mana enhancing ways. Have you noticed a shift? What have you found?
Well, I think that persons watching this will know about New Zealand having come together to fight the virus, and I actually put a lot of this attitude. It starts with our growing understanding of Māori culture, which really has much more in common with this restorative approach than it did with the judicial approach that we spoke about at the beginning. And the assumption really is that every person is worthy of respect and everyone has something to offer. And they are a respectable, a person who can contribute. So this word mana is a Māori word, And I think we've all learned quite a lot from Māori culture about how not to offer offence, although many of us still, I regret to say, still manage to do so.
And thank you for your words of wisdom and insight. So as we come to the end of this presentation, we would like to finish with the words of a great leader here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Dame Whina Cooper, and she says, take care of our children, take care of what they hear, take care of what they see, take care of what they feel, for how the children grow, so will be the shape of Aotearoa. And Aotearoa is the land of the long white cloud, and at the moment not many COVID cases other than at the borders, and you know, we're so grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Wendy and Leanne, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your practical skills and strategies today as part of this presentation. We will be opening up for a question and answer session, so check the schedule as to where that's going to be, and if you're not able to make that, then please write questions into the chat box below this presentation. And I'll finish us on, well, Wendy, last words, ladies. Wendy, do you have some last words?
Yes, I wanted to say how proud I am of what our team has achieved from the understandings that we grew out of restorative justice and now into this widespread practice.
Thank you. Leanne, any last words?
Just kia ora tātou, thank you for listening, and yes, have a great day.
Ngā ngamihi kia koutou katoa. We will finish with a closing karakia, kei noi tātou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atua o tō tātou ari ki o hiukuraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Hopefully we might meet some of you one day in person somewhere in the world at a conference or somewhere else. And of course, if you are in New Zealand or traveling to New Zealand and you would love to connect with us, please contact us at the Institute of Professional Learning, the University of Waikato. Ngā mihi nui.